Yeah, I'm Merv Schneider. I was born in 1925. I've lived in Nil ever since I went there to high school. Coming from Wormeling, I was born in Wormeling. I was left-handed, and in those days you weren't sort of right left-handed. The teacher had a piece of dowel and used to belt my left hand until I wrote with my right hand. That's all I do now is write with my right hand, but I eat and play bowls and everything else right-handed. So yeah, that was fairly traumatic in those days. But having been born in 1925, I experienced the depression. That stays with me for all my life. It was tough. People walking swaggies the road looking for food. Kids came to school with no shoes or socks. Food was scarce. We were supplied with soup once or twice a week at school to sustain those that didn't have the sustenance they should get. I was fortunate my parents were able to look after us. Radios were very few on those days. We were lucky to have a radio, most people didn't. And at the very young age, I got an interest in aviation, and mother would let me stay up late listening to the air race from London to Melbourne, and that was a great event, and that had an effect on my life because I always had an interest in aviation. Also, the cricket would be played over there, and I loved the cricket. Of course, by the time that was daylight there, it was night time here. I would get my mother to let me sit up till about 10 o'clock listening to the cricket. I left Wimmering in 1937 and came to Nil to the high school, and it was a different thing altogether at the high school. I did well. The discipline wasn't as shocking as it was at the state school, and after finishing high school, I got a job in the motor garage, and I had an auntie that was going to send me away to uni to be a priest, but I decided I didn't want to do that, and I got a job in those days. It was 48 hours a week. It worked on Saturday mornings and on Friday nights. I did join the Air Force during the war. I served 3 years in the war, flying with 25 Squadron Liberators, and that was a fair experience on its own. I went from being a boy to a man pretty quickly, and those years went well. I met my wife before I went away at the age of 17. We've been together for 79 years, and it's been wonderful. Later in life in the garage, I had the opportunity of going to the Antarctic. My wife, the kids were at university. My wife was very cooperative. So after training up in the mountains, I'd never seen snow in my life. Experienced those conditions, but we were trained up near in the mountains at the snowfields there. After the 3 months, we did the trip down on the Nella Dan, which in itself was an experience. I hadn't had an experience of life on ships, and passing through the roaring 40s and the screaming 50s. They're not underestimated at all. The ship rolled. At night, I got out of bed. It was that bad. I thought, well, if I'm going to drown, I'll get dressed. So I did, and I went up onto the bridge with the captain. He's a Danish man, and watching the inclinometer on the ship going over, and 45 degrees list, and over the other, and back to 46 or 7. And he would say, "This ship, it will go to 50 degrees." Well, it might. I didn't want it to. It was pretty terrifying going through that part of the sea. But once you get down further, it's pristine, it's calm, it's a great experience. You start to run into the pack ice about 100 kilometres out from the Antarctic shelf itself, and not a dam could handle, it wasn't a icebreaker, but it could handle the pack ice, but we could only get within about 20 miles of the Antarctic itself, the base that we were going to, Mawson, and there we unloaded the fixed-wing aircraft onto the ice. The helicopters, of course, could fly off the ship, and we transported all our goods and the changeover crew over into Mawson. I was there as a plant inspector, running the powerhouse and the tractors, which were D5s with grousers on them. The temperature's so cold down there that the tractors ran on aviation kerosene. You take 2 years' supply with you when you go, in case the ship can't get back when it's supposed to return. It's daylight from about November to about March. It's 24 hours of daylight. That takes a little bit of getting used to. Some of them chaps couldn't adapt to it real well, but I did. I disciplined myself to sleep and then go down to the powerhouse on time, so I more or less kept those out. Then comes about May to around to September, it's dark. As I was at home, I'd be into breakfast at 7:30, and back to work about 8, and work through till 5, and that saw me through. But yeah, it was great. You could see the difference in the men when the sun came. It was just like plant life. They blossomed. They weren't grumpy, and it was quite an experience to see that. The blizzards were quite an experience. You have a whiteout when the blizzards come. If you're caught out in those, it's like being in a dark room. You don't know north, south, east or west. So if you're out going in the field and travelling, quick thing is to shut down, throw up the parka tents that we lived in. They were quick to erect, and stay put until the blizzard passed over. Most of us, if we were back in the base, and we'd stayed indoors, but the engines in the powerhouse had to be refueled. So it was your turn to go down and refill and keep up to the engines. That was an experience. I can remember they had a blizzard lines down which you hung on to. Holding onto the blizzard line, my legs were just straight out. And I thought, well, if I let go of this blizzard line, I'll finish up out in the sea ice and halfway home to Australia. We were close enough. We used to have the Russians call occasionally, and it was a time when everybody thought Russians were under our beds and but they proved themselves to be very friendly when they flew into our base. They had aircraft where they could fly all through the year, but we didn't. Our aircraft were only down there for 3 months. They all came home. But we had the experience with the Russians that had been caught out on one of their bases for 10 days without supplies, and they passed in, they landed on our base, and they were absolutely exhausted and starving, but they were very reluctant to eat our food. They said, oh, you might need it, but we convinced them to eat with us, and then of course we let them, our beds, every man only had his own bed, but we shared, so they took our beds and slept for quite a few hours. But in return for that, we needed some welding electrodes. We were short, and they knew, so a week later they flew back and bought us welding electrodes. And they were very friendly. They wanted to know all about where we lived and our family life, and we the same with them. And when it came to man, it was, yeah, they were just the same as we were. They very friendly and normal people. It was great. Yeah. So I think that's my life. I've had a wonderful life, and all those, I'm lucky to live to where I am.